Welcome everyone to the Alumni Career Webinar, Setting the Stage for Virtual Meetings with Julie Campbell from the class of 1987, founder and chief storytelling officer of Center Stage Connections. I'm Maura Sweeney, the director of Alumni Career Development at Holy Cross, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's session for the Holy Cross community. We'll be together for about an hour today. Throughout the presentation, Julie will offer opportunities for you to ask questions, so please submit those through the Q&A as they come up. We'll do our best to make time to address all of the questions that you have. This presentation is recorded and will be made available to all participants in a few days. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker. Julie Campbell is a performer, presenter, writer, storyteller, teaching artist, and entrepreneur with over 30 years of experience connecting with audiences of all shapes and sizes. Inspired by a passion to bring the lessons learned on the stage to the world off stage, Julie founded Center Stage Connections to share the skills, techniques, and methods used on stage and in her daily life to help others become more engaged in their own personal and professional interactions. Julie has helped senior executives transform their organizations, politicians win elections, and new hires speak with confidence and clarity by learning how to be on. Julie is a graduate of the College of the Holy Cross with a BA in psychology and a graduate of the University of Washington Professional Actor Training Program with a Master of Fine Arts in Acting. And I have had the pleasure of getting to know Julie over the past few months, and I have really been looking forward to today's presentation. So with that, I will hand things over to you, Julie. I can't wait to learn how to be on. Thank you.
Thank you, Maura. I really appreciate that beautiful introduction, and I'm really thrilled and excited to be here and welcome you all into my webinar today. If social distancing, or physical distancing, I'll say, has taught me anything, it's that authentic connection remains an essential part of our human experience, thank goodness. Being apart from each other has driven home for me the importance of feeling connected, not just to our friends and family, but within our workplaces as well. How does that connection thing happen when we're all looking through this little tiny camera lens? Maura, you can go ahead to the next slide, thank you. A shared and memorable connection happens when you make an active choice to be present, authentic, curious, clear, and engaged. Those are all qualities developed over time and practiced consistently by an actor until they become second nature. And by the way, those are also the qualities of a strong leader and mentor, a reliable friend and coworker, and a memorable storyteller. Storytelling is a really important part of the business world because it makes good business sense. Because what do we all do when we hear a good story? We want to share it and tell somebody else. Stories connect with our emotions, and stories connect us to each other. So if you want to be more memorable, if you want to get more connected, become a good storyteller and bring those qualities into all of your interactions. For the next bit of time, I'm going to ask each of you to take just a tiny leap of faith and think of yourselves as actors and storytellers on your business stages, your virtual conversations, conference calls, meetings, presentations, and even interviews as your stage. Whether you're looking to improve clarity in your business story, how to get buy-in from stakeholders to better understand your vision for a new strategy or approach, lead a team where everyone is contributing and engaged, or trying to leave a memorable make a memorable connection in an interview. In this session, you're going to come away with the methods that an actor uses that you can use too, to meet those goals and other goals you might have for making lasting connections, even and especially when we're not in the same room. So, if you're going to start to think like an actor, there's one thing you should know, and that is that the job of an actor is actually very straightforward. It's to invest yourself fully and completely in the story that you're telling. So how do you start to do that? I'm going to tell you a short story. When I was in graduate school, working towards my Master of Fine Arts in Acting, the head of our program, Steve Pearson, had a few requirements that each of us had to fulfill before we got our degree. One of those requirements was that each of us had to learn to walk a tightrope. It wasn't to make us all more marketable for the circus, but walking across a tightrope has very little to do with athleticism or grace, and mostly to do with your ability to remain present and focused the time that you were up there on that tightrope. He believed that the process of learning to get across that tightrope, and if we could experience what it required of each of us to remain on that tightrope with presence, with focus, and it was also a metaphor of how you move your story forward as an actor and as a presenter, step by step by step. If we could understand the value of that, we would be more memorable actors, more engaged actors, and frankly, more engaged and connected human beings. So let's talk about how you do that. How do you bring that sense of presence and focus into your meetings before you click off the mute button and turn on the video camera? So we're going to go to the next slide, which is all about presence. We all know we have a better day when we're focused and engaged, but it takes energy to be focused. It's an active choice to come into the room prepared to communicate, to engage, to inspire, and to be inspired. Something that every actor does before we step on stage, I did it before I came onto this Zoom meeting today, is we have little rituals, routines that we put ourselves through to get our mind and body in the moment so that we can be engaged and available for our stages. And it all starts with your breath. Why your breath? Your breath is the bridge that connects your mind and your body. And science shows us that more oxygen to your brain allows for better recall, clearer thinking, and frankly, makes you more present. So I'm going to take you all through a quick 2-minute warm-up. You can do it before you sitting in your chair. You can do it standing up. You can do it sitting in your car whenever we all go back to work one day. It works anywhere. So I'm going to do this as if I'm going through it. You can turn off your cameras if you want, or you can leave them on. It's totally up to you. 2 minutes to bring you into the room, and it starts with your breath. So I like to close my eyes because it helps me focus. I'm going to take a hand and put it on your belly. The reason why focusing on your breath works is because it's very difficult to focus on anything else while you're focusing on your breath. Taking 3 slow, deep breaths, go ahead and do that now. And if you can inhale and exhale through your nose, it's all the better. On a count of 3, inhaling and exhaling. Do that 2 more times at your own pace. And exhaling. If you're sitting in a chair, make sure both of your feet are balanced on the floor. Take a check into your sit bones. See that both of those sit bones are balanced evenly on your chair. Continuing with your eyes closed if you like, send your attention now to the top of your head. And imagine that you have a string that's tied to the top of your head. At the end of that at the end of that string is a big balloon. As that balloon floats up towards the ceiling, your head and neck follow, your jaw relaxes, roll your shoulders back. We all spend a lot of time leaning into Zoom calls. Take 1 more deep breath and exhale. And before you open your eyes, if you still have your eyes closed, one more thing. This is something called an inner grin. And one of my fabulous first acting teachers, Lynn Kramer, who still is a teacher at Holy Cross, taught our whole class this on one of our very first days of acting classes. Imagine something called an inner grin. I'm not talking about a cheesy, creepy, weird smile, but an inner grin that starts from your belly or your heart, wherever you feel like your center. Imagine that grin that starts there. It comes up through your heart, into your throat, and out through your eyes as you open your eyes. That inner grin is something that you can come to your Zoom meetings with, that you can encourage other people to come with. I would never in my life tell someone to smile because that's just not a good thing to say to somebody. But an inner grin, right, comes from a place within you that conveys to your audience that you're available, that you're present, and that you're willing to listen. So try it out sometime, particularly if you know you have a little bit of a challenging audience and you're taking that question, you're thinking, how am I going to respond to that? Remember that inner grin. No one can ever take that away from you. All right, so let's move on to some of the technical sides of presence and how to bring yourself into these Zoom rooms. Actors always like to make an entrance, and I'm going to show you how to make that entrance in the strongest way possible when you come to the camera. Technical stuff conveys attention to details, your experience, your confidence, and that's what you want your audience to feel. When you want to make sure you have light on your face. You don't have to buy a fancy donut light. You can use a table lamp or a floor lamp. Just make sure it's behind the camera. Don't have the light behind you because then you look like a ghost. When you're when you're doing a video call, as much as you can, when you're speaking, speak into that camera. It's really challenging. It's a technique that takes a lot of practice, but the more you do it, the more comfortable it gets. And you just have to imagine that those people you want to talk to are through that camera lens. When you have in a Zoom room, you've got a lot of people around the room, it's our tendency to kind of look around and see who's there. That's cool for the beginning, but if you're a featured speaker, really try to stay focused on that camera. If you have notes that you're reading while you're presenting, what I'm doing here is I have my Zoom call is actually, the screen for my Zoom call is actually on the left-hand side. That's how I'm comfortable. And my notes are on the right-hand side. I try to scroll up my notes and keep actually what I'm saying and what I'm referring to as close to the top of the screen as possible. So I'm not looking down like this and you see the top of my head, right? All right. I think we're going to, so I'm just gonna, so we're gonna move on in just a second, but the other question I get a lot is, should I stand or should I sit? All right, if you have back-to-back Zoom meetings, you're not gonna wanna be standing for those. But if you're presenting, I would encourage you to try it once, rehearse your presentation once standing. Standing brings more of you into the room, it requires more energy, it requires more presence, and frankly, it just makes it more interesting for people who are watching. That's my opinion. All right, I can get into more details about the standing thing later if we have time at the end. Okay, let's go ahead on to authenticity. When you choose to say and do what you actually believe, that's authenticity. I'm an eternal optimist, and I believe that COVID, for all of its challenges and everything we're going through together here, has humanized us. And authenticity is here to stay. I was listening to a terrific webinar last week by a woman whose name is Anna Catalano, C-A-T-A-L-A-N-O. She's ranked by Fortune magazine as one of the most powerful women in international business. She was doing a talk on gender equity in boardrooms. She's on a ton of boards. And what I was so struck by in her interview was the number of times that she would weave in stories of her husband, her children, her elderly parents, and her elderly grandparents. The choices that she made in her business life weren't about finding a life-work balance. She talked about it all as life. And I messaged her in the comment section, thanking her for being a leader, a female leader, and being an example of what we all experience and what we all struggle with every day, and what has become more visible now that we have these cameras in our house and we're trying to just keep it going and make it all work. If you have a chance to listen to her, please do it. One of the questions that somebody asked was, can you give us one thing? What was the most impactful business decision you made to move your career forward? And her answer was, it was who I married. Because she said all of the decisions that we made were about, really about our family, our team. And I found that to be really, really insightful and frankly, very refreshing to hear from a woman in such an elevated position. So what happens when a leader sets the tone for that authenticity? You encourage other members of your team to do the same. So everyone can come to the table, everyone can come into the room as their authentic selves. When you empower others to bring their authenticity into the room, you encourage empathy. right? Because when someone feels they can bring their authentic selves into the room, we're listening to that with each other. And when we really listen to each other, we can understand why something matters, why a particular issue, why a question, why a strategy, why a change in something that's happening in the company matters to them. By them coming in with their authenticity, we're all allowed to do that, and empathy grows. That's a good thing for all of us. All right, curiosity. The smartest and most interesting people I know are curious. They always are looking to learn something new. If you can come to the table, to your meeting or to your presentation with a sense of curiosity, you're one step closer to making a connection. Because you make your audience feel like they're important, and the reason you're there, if they're behind the camera, you're there for them. So one of the things that's happening in this virtual world is that we're all living with this 30-second rule, which is this. When your audience sits down, think of it this way. In the back of their minds, they're thinking, tell me why I should care, tell me why I'm here, and then maybe I'll keep listening and follow on to the next slide, right? So you want to get a little bit into the heads of your audience and consider where they're coming from. Something I talk about here, and I'm going to talk about it in more detail when we get into the next session, which is about clarity and really crafting your presentation, is create a sticky moment. What does that mean? If you can make it something about your audience, a little story nugget that will resonate with them. Maybe it's a connection that the two of you have, a person you have in common. Maybe you've taken a hot minute to go on LinkedIn or Google News or Yahoo News. There's really no excuses anymore for not knowing a little bit more about your audience before you make a presentation, right? If you can start that with a little something about them, you're already winning because they're engaged, they feel like they matter, and you're also making it a conversation. That's another real skill for people that are curious, is they come into the room wanting it to be a conversation. I heard a really terrific anecdote about this from a friend of mine who works for a marketing firm, and it was a kind of a startup firm. In any case, they were in the last round of competition to win this big deal, and he knew that they were up against a much larger company, but the fact that they had made it into the final round, he knew that that meant that they had all of the stuff that was there. It was just that little thing that was, they're a little bit new. I don't really know. What am I, maybe he knew that that was like the one thing that was holding him back. So he decided to take a bold move, and he came into that presentation and he started with this question. For this meeting to be great, what will I need to have accomplished? And the people in the room all they're there with their notebooks and their pencils, and they're ready to start taking notes, and they all kind of looked up and went, nobody's really asked us that before. And fast forward, they won the deal. And he was told later that that had a huge impact on them because it let them know that he was there to say, hey, I'm at your service here. Let's talk about what I can do so that we can move forward together. By making it a conversation, by disarming his audience, he won the deal. In your internal meetings, right? All those weekly meetings that a lot of you have, one after the other sometimes. If you can go into those meetings with a different kind of mindset that's about considering not just what somebody is saying, but how and why they're saying it, right? That also applies to, well, really not just your internal meetings, really any meeting, any conversation that you're having with someone. And if you have a meeting where you're just not excited about being there, you've been through this before, you're kind of bored, yada, 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 shift your mindset and listen as if you're willing to have your mind changed. It's a whole different way of listening. People talk about active listening, and yeah, that's a thing, but I think if you come into it with the action of listening as if you're willing to have your mind changed, shift your perspective and we can all see examples in the world today of how listening in that way can really change and impact things. A couple of other little notes here about listening. It's the number one thing that people say when they're asked about something they remember or value in a mentor, is that they listen. I don't know that I've heard anyone say, you know, my mentor was really great. They talked all the time and didn't want to know anything that I had to say, right? So it's listening is actually harder than speaking. Actors learn that very early on. It takes energy, it takes effort, and it's a choice, but it conveys curiosity and empathy and interest in your audience. If you have kids, you know that as a parent, one of the most important things you can do is listen. Very hard to say something wrong when you're listening. I learn that every day with my 3 teenagers. All right. I think we can go ahead and I can take some questions more if you have something that's come in. I'm going to take a drink. I'm doing a lot of talking and I need a sip of water. So yes. What do you have for me?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Since we're talking about active listening, I think I've got a great question that came in from registration that addresses this perfectly, actually. Someone asked about attentiveness on screen. So how to stay attentive on screen while taking notes, which I am doing actually as we speak, and giving off the perception and letting people know that you are actually listening, but you're also taking notes. And so you might be seeing the top of my head. How would you recommend that someone go about achieving that level of engagement while also being studious and taking their notes?
So I love that question, and it's not the first time I've received that question because I do think it's important. And actually, if anyone could see Maura, she was actually doing. I mean, I can see her because I just have our 2 screens up here. But you were actually doing what I personally recommend. All right, and part of it. Yeah. So part of this, and what's refreshing to know is you're just a teeny bit younger than me. So what I have to say, I can say safely bridges a few generations, or a generation, maybe not. Where is it? Okay. Anyway, so my preference when I am taking notes in a presentation is that you write them down. I find it incredibly distracting. And this is when I was in the room with people and I would go to, actually go on site, and I would look, I'm presenting, so I can make the rules, but I would say, like, if you want to take notes, and I bring pads of paper and pencils for everybody, because it drove me cuckoo when people would sit behind their computer screens and they're looking at their keyboards and they're typing. So you can see even what I'm doing right now, right? I'm talking to you, but if I'm typing on my screen, it really doesn't look like I'm listening. So I think it's a more engaging choice to go old school, be a little old fashioned, and have your journal, your notebook there that you use specifically for meetings, and write your notes down. And it's one of those things where as you're writing, you can look at the camera. Yep, I got what you're saying. And you do that. There are times when I'm also part of meetings where I have to go onto my phone to find something because I don't have all this crazy technology in my house. So I'll just say to them, I'm just going to look at my phone real quick. I'm not checking my text. I'm not playing Candy Crush. I'm going to look at this. So, all of those things are, I think, are good. And I hope that answers the question.
Yes, no, it does. And I think even just stating, like you said, I'm going to check my phone, or I'm taking notes. I hope you don't mind. That too, I think, really makes a difference. When you say that, I think, oh, okay, I understand why you're looking away. That makes total sense.
It's also a sense of presence, that presence that I talked about. You can convey that through a camera too, where our brains are really amazing, that we can think about a lot of things all at once, which is part of the challenge today, right? Is all that information that we do have coming in. And you can let someone know just kind of what your choice is by being in the room and occasionally looking there and, writing a note. You can convey that through a camera, and that's my preference.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's very, very helpful. And I appreciate the plug for my note taking. That will be my win for today.
Fair enough. A+ for me.
Yeah.
All right. Very cool.
I have one other question that came in that talks about presence, and I think this would be a really nice time to ask. What are the most common, easily correctable mistakes that people make during online meetings?
Okay. The first thing that comes to my mind with that is really how you're engaging with your camera.
Mm.
I think as I said in the beginning, it's not easy, right? I do it a lot every day. I did it a lot every day before I came to doing it really every day. And to imagine your audience behind that screen takes some practice. Mm-hmm. So so if that's tricky for you, I'm getting off topic. I'm going to go back. So the common mistakes people make. So looking at the camera, when you're listening, it's okay to look down so you're actually looking like I'm looking at you more because you asked me the question. And then I'm going to go back to answering it there. The other technique I teach people, and actually I was just working with a couple of political candidates with this, because now all of these, all of our, the forums and whatnot that happen for elections are all being done remotely. So what I suggested that they do when they're taking a question, and when you need time to collect your thoughts and get an answer, is look into the camera as you're getting that question. If you need a minute to consider your answer, what I suggest doing is look just to the right, which is what I'm doing right now, or to the left of your computer screen. So as I'm coming up with my answer, I'm doing that. And what I'm not doing is this. I'm not going like this. I'm looking up at the ceiling. I'm trying to think, what am I going to say? It's a very subtle thing, but the psychology behind that is that when someone looks up at the ceiling, it's as if they're looking for an answer that's outside themselves. Whereas if I look just to the left or to the right, just think of it like if you were in the room with someone talking, right? No one stands when they're sitting with someone and just stares into a camera the whole time and doesn't blink. That would be really weird and unsettling. So you want to be able to look to the left or the right as you collect your thoughts. If staring into that camera is getting really old, that shows that you're taking a minute to collect your thoughts, to consider how you want to reply, and then you look at that camera and you deliver the answer. So it's okay to do that. You want to try to avoid the other, common mistakes. There's a lot of, right now I have a small laptop that I'm doing this off of. So, but even if I'm like, my eyes are kind of wandering around the screen as I'm talking, that's distracting to you guys as an audience. You're like, what the heck is she looking at, right? So as much of that you can avoid is keeping your focus. I'd say that makes a big difference.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And to everyone else's questions that come in, find that Q&A button. You can type them in there, and I'll pass it back over to you, Julie, and we'll have some time for questions at the end.
Cool. All right. So we're going to move on to clarity. All right. This is the meat and potatoes, the tofu and the vegetables, the rice and beans, the nuts and bolts. This is the meat of the presentation. For my presentation, that's about your presentations. Hold me accountable here and stick with me through this slide. This has the most information in it. This slide is all about clarity. And if I'm not being clear to you, please ask the question and let Maura know, because that would not be right to be talking about clarity and being unclear. Whenever an actor comes to the stage, there are 3 questions we ask ourselves. We have a new script. The first question every actor asks themselves is, what is my objective by the end of the play? What is the result that I want? That happens with a play, a movie, even a commercial. Everything that an actor does within that story drives towards that objective. We write it down, top of our script, and it holds us accountable so that everything we do as our character moves forward in that journey drives towards that objective. What does that mean for you as a business person? As you prepare for your internal meetings or your external meetings, and you want to lay out your strategy to get buy-in from your management team, ask yourself, what do you want to achieve with that meeting or that presentation? And every single part of your story has to drive towards that objective. By writing it down, there's that pencil again I was talking about. You can type it in though if you want to. Put it into one sentence and refer back to it as you go through your presentation, as you create your presentation, and hold yourself accountable with that objective in mind. If it's a capabilities presentation, or if you're telling your business story and you want your audience to know what you're all about, ask yourself first, what is it that your audience needs? And that presentation might need to change in subtle ways based on who your audience is. At the beginning of a presentation, you want to get to that little thing I mentioned in curiosity, right? Which is the sticky moment. If you can get to that within the first 30 seconds of your presentation, give your audience that little nugget that tickles their brain, that makes them want to know more, they're going to follow along with you. Think of it as like a movie trailer, right? You're not going to blow it all out there for everyone so they have no reason to stick around, but you're going to give them just a little, and you're going to tell them, in the next 10 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour, I'm going to give you blah, blah, blah. A little nugget so that they want to stick around. Let me talk a little bit more about this sticky moment. It's really, it's one of my favorite things when I'm working with clients, because very often clients will they'll have their presentations laid out, and sometimes it's staying on point, sometimes it's not. But once you understand what your story is and what your message really is, that little sticky nugget will start to reveal itself, very often just through conversations. And will also help with creating that sticky moment. I think I just said sticky nugget. Okay, you know what I'm talking about, right? Is that 30-second rule. Put yourself in the mind of your audience and remember that if you can get them in that first 30 seconds, they're going to stick around. Otherwise, they may be off playing Candy Crush or petting their cat or something and turning their video off. All right. For job seekers, when you go into an interview, think about the 3 things, come with 3 things that you want that interviewer to know about you before that interview is over, right? And if, for example, hang on just a second, I just lost my, this is authenticity at work. This is me losing my place. Where are we here? There we go. Okay, so if you're interviewing and you want to come into that room with those 3 things that you don't want to leave you want to make sure you leave those 3 things in the room. Think about that, work out those stories beforehand. Have them be about a minute or a minute and a half, and let them reflect 2 things. Go back to that authenticity, right? What are the 3 things that you think are really important about you, that you want to make sure that interviewer knows? And have those 3 things ready and available to talk about. If you are a creative, out-of-the-box thinker, don't just tell them that. Have a story that reflects that. And practice those stories ahead of time. I can't say enough about rehearse, 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 right? Have those ready to go. The clearest objectives, whether they are for a comedy or a drama, or you're trying to win the business, they always convey urgent need and high stakes. Urgent need and high stakes require a deep personal investment, and they make for more engaging stories and lasting connection with an audience. I came across a really terrific objective, and this is actually an objective that someone uses for most of their presentations. I want my audience to discover what matters more than just this meeting. So if you come to a meeting with that in mind, that's going to be driving you forward and will shift your thinking in a very different way. Keep sticking with me. I'm going to get to more specific examples of how this all comes together in the next slide, but let's move on. Actually, let's take a little bit, what I want to say here along with objective, right, is you want to think of yourself as a little bit like a playwright too, right? And what are the lessons of good playwrights? Good playwrights always keep the story moving forward. So you, as you're creating that presentation, recognize when you're going off the rails. Sometimes it makes sense to have someone else take a look at it because they can tell when that's happening. A good playwright never says something in 3 lines that can be said with 1 line, which also means never say something in 3 slides that can be said with 1 slide. Dig deep into your text, your story, your message, and be aware if there's any industry jargon in there that might be, maybe it doesn't really jive with your authentic way of speaking or is unfamiliar to your audience, and consider adjusting that or taking that out. If you are solid and clear, your audience will be solid and clear, and they're going to come along with you. There's a phrase in the theater called less is more. That's what a good playwright does, right? But for you, you have to know that when you're in the room, when you're making that presentation, when you're engaging in that meeting, your audience is there to see you, and they're going to remember you. You may work for a company that values data and statistics and requires you to have that data and those statistics in your presentation. But reading them off word for your audience is boring. And if you have sources that you need to have in there that back up what you're saying, and they all have to be there on the screen, and I have clients who they say, well, you know, I'm like, do you really need all that there? And they said, yeah, I got to have all that there. So what we do then is we pick one of those sources, one of those bits of data, and talk a little bit about that. Because again, our brains are capable of a lot of things. And if your audience wants to read through all of that and still listen to you, terrific. But I will tell you, I will guarantee you, your audience is going to remember you, not necessarily the data that you're presenting. And you don't have to believe me. There's a terrific research scientist who's at Princeton. And this study was actually done a while ago. But I came across it and I was like, yes, here's the science to back up what I'm saying for all the skeptics out there. He did this really cool project where he tapped into the brain activity of the audience, and he was a presenter, and him as a presenter, right? So as he was delivering this presentation, he was talking about data and statistics. They see that the brain activity of the people in the audience is all over the place. Their auditory cortex, in their you know, their I'm not a science person, right? So anyway, it's all over their brain, right? And his as well. Then, from the moment he started to tell a story, everybody's brain activity in the audience, in his, like, synced up. It's so cool. And what are the implications for that? Is that we are hardwired for stories. We want to hear stories, and we're really good at telling stories. Everyone in this room is a natural storyteller. Sometimes you just gotta tap into it. So when you're making your presentation, when you go through and you look at that objective and you get really clear, remind yourself that it's a story that you're telling and that your audience is there to hear you. Okay, I gotta take a drink. Next point is, how do I get what I want? Sorry, Maura, we gotta go back. I'm still on clarity. That's okay. I know. I got a lot to say about being clear. All right. So next question. How do I get what I want? Actors are always doing something on stage. We speak with specific intentions, and we play concrete actions. Remember that tightrope image I told you in the beginning? Every sentence, every part of a play, of a script, of your play, of your script, needs to move your story forward, and every line and every slide should be an action that moves you one step closer to that end. What the heck am I talking about? I'm going to give you an example so this makes sense, and there might be some bad acting coming up, so forgive me. I hope there are no critics in the audience, but this will drive home what I'm talking about. One of the things I talk about with clients, and this is particularly useful if you're not so comfortable presenting, because a lot of people now are in roles where they didn't used to have to be talking to an audience, and now they do have to be talking to an audience. So I recognize that not everyone is as psyched as I am to get in front of a camera. So this works for you as well. When you're working through your presentation, come up with 3 to 5 active verbs that work for you, that make sense within your presentation. So let's say at the end of your whole gig, you have to say this challenging line. Some people like this, some people don't. I don't like this line, but sometimes I have to say it too. Here it comes. How can we move forward together? Right? That's your big closer. You got to get it in there at the end, because otherwise, what's the point, right? So I'm going to play that line with 3 very clear, distinctive active verbs, so you can understand what I'm talking about, and you can understand how the choice you make for playing an action is going to make what the audience receives very different from one thing to the next. So I'm going to say that line first with the active verb question. How can we move forward together? Okay, so what are you getting as an audience? Wow, ooh, that's not somebody who knows what they're talking about, right? I'm not so sure I want to move forward with that person. Why are they asking me that, right? So I'm thinking of the verb question, but what you're receiving are certain qualities, right? So now I'm going to try that with the verb confront. How can we move forward together? Okay, a little too much Tony Soprano there, and probably not somebody who you want to keep doing business with. That was only there for effect. I realize not a good choice of an active verb when you're trying to engage your audience. Okay, number 3, here's the money. Invite. How can we move forward together? All right, I threw a little bit of an inner grin in there. I let the question land. I took a little bit of a pause there, but what I was thinking in my head was invite. So hopefully you're able to see how that works with your presentations. And honest to goodness, if you go through and go on a thesaurus and look up, you look up the word invite. If you go in there, you're going to find another 4 or 5 words that mean the same thing, or maybe there's another verb that makes sense to you. It doesn't matter. What it matters is that it's active and that you're trying to do something to your audience. And by the way, I talked about listening earlier. Listening is an active choice too. All right, a note about pauses. If you're making a big presentation like I am, and I confess I'm probably going a little quickly through this, because an hour for me, believe it or not, is not a lot of time to tell you what I like to do. So I'm probably going a little too quickly. But there's a phrase in this theater that's called earn the silences. Too many pauses drag your story down and you can lose your audience. But certain pauses are important and you want to craft them into your presentation. When you rehearse your presentation out loud, you will find them organically. You're going to find those natural shifts. Obviously, when you're moving from one slide to the next, that's a natural pause. But maybe you're delivering something in your presentation that you've said 500,000 times, but your audience is only hearing it for the first time, which is a little nugget to remember, that's where your audience is coming from very often. You may have done this 55 times, but if your audience is hearing something for the first time, and you're delivering something that's really important, that it really needs to land on your audience, give them a moment to let it sink in. And as you put yourself in your audience's point of view, while you're going through your presentation out loud, you'll be able to find where those pauses need to be. And I keep saying rehearse it out loud because I know that it takes time. And I know, because I work with clients who I'll do a session with them and I'll come back and I'll say, so did you rehearse it out loud? And they'll go, well, no, I kind of did a little bit. You can learn so much by, even if you're just going to record like the first 5 minutes of whatever you have to say. A camera will tell you everything you need to know about what's working and what isn't. And there's huge value in just recording it and watching yourself back. It can be kind of painful, but let go of the critic that sits on your shoulder and don't make it about all the things you're doing wrong. Be objective and say, you know what? I was going too fast there. I kind of sounded like I didn't know what I was talking about right there. Whatever it is, and keep a sense of humor about it, but it will give you a lot of information. All right, last part of this, and then I'm gonna bring this in. It's all gonna make even more sense, I hope. Last question an actor asks themselves within a story is, what are the obstacles in my way of getting what I want? For you, you can consider a lot of those obstacles beforehand. We can't predict everything that's gonna happen in a live presentation, but you can definitely come to that sort of thinking again, put yourself in the minds of your audience. Are there questions they might have about your logistics, your timeline? Maybe it's going to be a skeptical kind of audience. Maybe you know that going into that room, there's that one person who kind of always gives you a little bit of a rough time. So just tell yourself before you go in, okay, I know that person is there. I got an inner grin on. I'm going to keep that balloon that's tied to the top of my head. I'm going to keep my head and neck moving up. I'm going to keep my body present in there. And even if I'm really nervous, and even if that person over there is making me feel really uncomfortable, I'm going to let them know that I'm confident and that I know what I'm talking about. So there you go. All right. Maura, let's move on to engagement. We're going to pull all of this stuff together that I just talked about in clarity. Sylvester Stallone, didn't think I was going to bring him up in this presentation, did you? In his first movie, Rocky, can teach us a lot about telling a business story. So here's how that goes. Rocky's objective, right? What does he want in the beginning of that movie is what we would expect. He wants to win the title. But what does he really need? The love of his life. That's what drives that story. And we all know that because at the very end of the film, he's sitting there in the corner of the ring, beaten up, his eyes are bloody, he can hardly see, and he's saying one word, Adrian, right? That was really bad acting. He does it much better than I do, but he makes a lot more money than I do. So he's in the corner of the ring with that one word. What is he doing with that word? What does he want? What does he need? He's playing actions with that word. One word, Adrian. He's pleading, he's yearning, he's calling, he's searching. All right, now I know you can't do those things in your business presentations. That would be really unsettling. But let's look at these two specific business scenarios with that story that I just told you. Let's say you are tasked with delivering a research report. That's your story. At your next team meeting, your stage and your audience, you could define your objective for that meeting as A, I have to report on the research findings, or I need to compel the team, your audience, to engage with my thorough and detailed investigation. Okay, scenario 2. Let's say you're that team's manager. Your job is to convince the executive team, your audience, to approve and fund your project. Like most companies, the executive team, right, they balance a host of competing priorities, so you know you already have a tough audience. You could define your objective for that meeting as A, I have to deliver the benefits and business case for my initiative. Or B, I need to infect the stakeholders with my team's passion for this initiative. In both of those examples, choice A is doing kind of what your audience expects. Yawn, ugh, Zoom fatigue. Choice B, the bold choice, requires more personal investment, it raises the stakes, and it shifts your intention. By redefining that internal objective for the meeting, it changes the way you prepare for and deliver your story. One other little thing that these examples demonstrate that's near and dear to my heart is the idea of ensemble. That's what we call a team in the theater. Here's a fabulous definition of ensemble that I came across. I did not come up with this, but I love it. People who come together with the mutual commitment to create something new and memorable. How cool is that? How fabulous would it be to come to work every day with that objective? And that's what actors get to do. And it's a pretty fabulous thing to be a part of. All right, we're going to wrap it up on the next slide, and then I can take some more questions. So hopefully, after coming on this journey with me, you all have a few tools that actors use for connection on your business stage. Think of yourself as an actor. It's your stage, it's your room, and if you shift your thinking just a little bit, you can invest more deeply, which draws your audience in and makes a connection. Choose to be present. You have the tools to enter a virtual room or a conversation and mentally and physically stay there. Be authentic. Choose to bring your better, more vibrant, more invested you into the room and encourage other people to do that as well. Be curious. Listen for why someone is saying something, not just what. And try to do that with your colleagues and your clients. Be clear. Rehearse your gig out loud. When you rehearse it out loud, you'll know, does it still tell the story that you want to tell? Break it down into objective actions and obstacles. And imagine your audience hearing it for the very first time. Choose to be engaged. When you make an active choice to come to your stage, your meeting prepared, with your most vibrant, committed self, can't always do it every day, but you can strive for that. To come in with presence, curiosity, and clarity, you set the tone for everyone else in your ensemble to do the same. Then everyone is committed to be engaged. If we're all invested, we connect. That's the magic of theater, the magic of a memorable meeting or a presentation, and the magic of shared time and space, even when we're not in the same room together. That's a wrap for me, at least for the presentation. I'm happy to take some questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I love that definition of creating something new and memorable together.
Isn't that lovely? I found that and I was just like, oh, it like melted my heart. It really kind of put together, you know, I'm a mush and I love the theater, and it really was like, yes, that's what it is. And that's what I miss about being in the room. But you know, we can all put a little bit more juice into things and try to make it happen in these virtual interactions. It can happen.
Right. Right. And with that intention in mind, I think that really does open it up. It makes me think about every meeting a little bit differently now. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I hope so. I mean, we all just got to kind of get through this the best way we can. And if you bring a little more life into the room, then great.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I have a number of questions that have come in, so we can definitely dig into a few different areas that are on people's mind.
Okay.
One of them has to do with what you said is your favorite part of working with clients, of helping them streamline their story a little bit.
Yeah.
Someone asks, how do I, quote unquote, cut the fat off my speaking and get to the point more quickly? I tend to like to tell stories, which is good, but I guess a little too much in this case. So how do you go about working with clients in that way?
So it's tricky. It's tricky to trim the fat. Particularly, it's not so tricky for me. It's more tricky for the client, because when it's your story, particularly if, you know, the more connected you are, I work some with nonprofits, and in the nonprofit world, there's really like very deep reasons why you know, you choose to work for a nonprofit. So those stories are very near and dear to people's hearts. But at the same time, if you're working for a business, there's times where if you've written the story, or if someone else has written the story, and you have to if you have to stick to a script, I'm really going to go back to read your story through. Do it out loud. If you can, do it in front of a camera now. And you can see by hearing it, by listening to the story, it will reveal pretty glaringly what needs to get tossed and what needs to stay. And because how we read something, and even when we're rehearsing it, if we're just like I'm looking at my script now and I'm just reading it, it's a very different thing than when I listen back to it. That's how you have to really look at how your audience is hearing it. So, you know, where I come in is I'm objective about things. I can go through a whole story and I can say, I mean, I had a client who called me on a Thursday and had this huge presentation to do on a Monday. And she said, oh my God, it's 15 minutes long. And I just found out that it has to be, I'm given, at 6 minutes, they're going to cut me off.
Oh,
And she
wow.
was completely stressed. So I said, all right, send it over to me. And honestly, cutting through it that happened pretty quickly after we got very clear on what was your objective and being very, very specific about what does your audience need? What are the elements that have to be in that presentation, and what can you toss out? And it really kind of takes you have to take a step back in order to do that. And I will confess, it takes a lot longer than you think it does when you start out. If you have a 15-minute presentation with that particular client, I think we worked for, I don't know, it was a few hours to kind of get that down to 5 minutes. And here's a little statistic for you that I came across recently, was that if you're doing a presentation, you should be rehearsing 1 minute for every, sorry, I got that the other way. You should be rehearsing an hour for every minute of the presentation.
Oh, wow. Wow.
That gives you a sense of how much, really how much work goes into making something really clear, and, also all the other stuff that goes into that. So hopefully that answered the question. If I didn't answer that completely, you have feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to talk on the phone. Sometimes these things are better when they're part of a conversation, so I can really kind of hear what you're trying to get at.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, that means I have to thank you for all of the hours that you put into preparing for us today.
Oh, I didn't mean that.
No, but it's true. I think that's a really...
Oh no, thank you more.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah. Well, here's another good question. And speaking of hours devoted to a presentation, someone asks, how do you keep audiences and attendees engaged during a half day or a full day webinar, which never used to be a thing, and now is something that people are finding themselves maybe on the presenter end or organizing? Do you have tips and strategies for these longer virtual events?
Right. So I've actually just started talking to a client about this recently, and just as a little side note, my children are all in these long webinars all day as they go to virtual learning. That my daughter is upstairs. She has a 6-hour day. And my high schoolers have slightly shorter days, but the most important thing about that is to recognize sort of, and some of the science that's behind people's attention span. And actually, Maura, you brought this to my attention too, that ideally, if every sort of 15 minutes or so is when people can start to kind of, their eyes glaze over and they start to check off, and start to check out and sort of think about what do they need to do next. So if every kind of 15 minutes you can build that into the creation of and what you do, which is lovely because I've been a part of a lot of these webinars, is you tend to come in every sort of 15, 20 minutes with either a poll or a question, right? And you gave me some terrific advice when we were originally thinking about doing polls for this presentation, which was make it quick. Don't make it, don't give people a lot of choices like A, B, C, D. It's either yes or no or A or B. But by doing that, you're kind of shifting people's thinking. You're getting them out of that world and giving them something else to do. So I think that 15-minute thing. I also feel like an hour is the max for any presentation, really. And I told Maura this before we started our presentation, that if I have, and I did this myself, that I knew that I had an hour with all of you, but when I was rehearsing this, I made sure that I wasn't going I wasn't going over 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Because that's really the maximum time to listen to anybody virtually about anything. I don't care if, how amazing they are, that's really enough. And then to have questions at breaks in there breaks that up as well. Hopefully that answers a little bit of that question.
Yes, I think that's great, because I do think, once people can be more engaged, as the in your order sequence,
right?
It does. Also, they go by faster, right?
Right, yeah. And also within that, I will say it's everybody's choice to be engaged, right? So that's why excuse me, I got a piece of ice in my cup, and I'm going to crunch in your ear. So that's why I talk about being an active choice. Yeah. You can come to the room present, curious, clear, and all of that, or you cannot.
Yeah.
So part of that is on the investment of the participants as well. It's not all on the people throwing the party.
Right. Okay, good. Here's a question that's kind of tough. It's tough in person, and I think it's tough online. They ask, if there's no meeting facilitator, how do you deal with people talking over you or multiple people trying to get the floor next?
It sounds like my family meals on Thanksgiving and Christmas. Walk away? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
So look, I feel like I'm going to be honest. I don't know if this is totally in my wheelhouse because I'm not a techie person. So I'm going to answer this in the best way I know how. If it's your room, if it's your gig, if it's your webinar, if it's your presentation, then it's your room, and you can control the mute button is really kind of the, but I would put that out there at the beginning of the meeting so it doesn't seem like you're trying to be the great and powerful Oz out there, but that you're doing this kind of to make things flow seamlessly. That's my best advice for that. And I'm going to think a little bit more about that question because I don't like all that technical stuff. I'll be completely honest. And to have someone who's hosting it really does kind of take the pressure off. So maybe that's something you could work with a coworker to say, can we make ourselves co-host, and can you monitor the questions coming in and monitor that mute function so that as a speaker, you're not having to do all of that. It really takes a huge load off if you can do that. So I hope that wasn't a total cop-out saying get somebody to help you with it, but
no. Well, because it made me think. I've been on some meetings that are like this, and I know some people will use if they're on Zoom, and I think a lot of the technology is like this. From a technical standpoint, there's the raise hand button that you can use in a meeting, so that you see that little image. But whether or not people actually listen to that is a totally different story.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think I think one of the best, easiest, and I'm going to go back and say it again, that perhaps one of the quickest remedies for that is set that up when you start the meeting. These are the guidelines around the meeting, and everybody has to play in the sandbox respectfully. And this is how we're going to set it up, and everybody will get. It's like when you're talking to I don't know, I'm thinking about my kids a lot because we're all in the room together. But it's like I say to them in all these conversations, everyone's going to get a chance to speak.
Yeah.
Just let me know that you have something to say, and we'll make sure that you have a chance to speak. So kind of setting up the ground rules beforehand maybe will help to make that a little different too.
Yes, and it seems like if there's no facilitator, no one who's a clear leader, then it's okay to suggest to the group, hey, since no one's leading this, why don't we come up with some ground rules for how we want to handle this?
There you go. That's democracy at work.
Right. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much that we have been able to get through the questions that came in. So this is perfect. The timing is wonderful. And we have one final comment that weaving and acting buzzwords and phrases really made sense and seems very intuitive and logical. So appreciative of your work. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
And I mentioned at the beginning, I was really looking forward to this, and I've got so many good notes that I'm actually going to take to my meetings this afternoon and moving forward, because it's a subtle shift, but I can already tell what a big difference that it can make. So thank you.
Perfect. I'm happy to hear that. And I hope that that's what people leave with, are really skills you can take literally into your next meeting and into your wider presentations. So thank you for being here. And thank everybody for participating. Reach out to me. I'm happy to chat. I love to talk, in case you haven't noticed.
Fabulous. And you'll see Julie's contact information is on the screen. If you have any questions, you can also follow up with me in the alumni office. And I'll be following up with everyone who's registered to share the recording from today. There's a survey that will come out afterwards. And I love feedback and advice. So please share that with us. Bring us.
I'll second that. Please fill out the survey. Yes. Thank you.
Yes. And hopefully you'll join us again for another webinar. I'll make a point to have a clear objective and keep us on track and engaged. I'll try and bring some of these buzzwords with me next time. So I hope you'll join me and keep me honest on my presentation. And I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Julie, thank you so much again.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone. Have a fabulous day.